Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you with another movie review, and today is another entry in childhood favorites. Today is a film that I have watched ever since I was a kid, first on VHS, then through an AVI DVD. And of course, it's a film I loved it as a kid, and when I revisited it a couple years ago as an adult, still loved it. Watched it again last night, so it would be fresh in my mind. And of course is the Walter Murch directed film from 1985, based on two novels by L. Frank Baum, Return to Oz. Now, first of all, I must state that this film, even though its story does kind of have a continuation, it is technically not a direct sequel to the '39 film from MGM. Granted, you can technically connect it to it if you want to, but it's technically not an official sequel, partially because the original was made by MGM, this is made by Disney. If I remember correctly, by this point, the first book had fallen into the public domain, and I believe the first couple of the other ones had, or were going to, but Disney had the option for them, so they technically didn't need permission. The only permission they really needed from MGM to use anything was to use the ruby slipper, since that was an MGM creation. In the novel, they were silver shoes. Anyway, the two novels it's based on are The Marvelous Land of Oz, the first sequel, which is the only one that usually points the wizard himself in a negative light, and it's so far the only one of the sequels I've read in its entirety, but I have to reread it because that was years ago. And the follow-up book, Ozma of Oz. And it takes certain plot elements and meshes them together, and it does it in a unique way, in a creative way. And despite the fact that at the time it came out it had mixed to negative reviews, this film has gone on to have a lot of fans, partially because they consider it a more faithful adaptation of the series than the MGM film, which I could see why that. Because the MGM film seems to be more aimed at kids, while this one is probably some at kids, but it's probably more the older audience. And I guess that's why some people might be a little iffy on showing this to kids. Like most of the negative reviews I read on Amazon and all that, that's what it points out to, but I watched this film as a kid, and I didn't think it was as creepy as they're making it out to be. Maybe it's because by that point I'd watched a bunch of horror films and something, but even if I didn't, I wouldn't really have found it that creepy. Maybe the villain would be scary, but just didn't seem creepy. The fact that it would traumatize kids, because that's what they're making it out to be. But anyway, nowadays it seems to be getting a lot more praise. It has a 6.6 on IMDb. It 5.6% audience.
So it's getting its due. It's one of those films that, comes out. Mild people sort of like it at first, but then as the years go by, more people like it, which I'm glad. And the sad thing about that is that it hardly made any money in relation to its budget. It had, according to Wikipedia, it had a $28 million budget. I don't know if that's what it was made on at the time or if that's adjusted for inflation. Either way, you could see a lot of that money up on the screen. I'm going to say more likely that's adjusted for inflation. Then again, could also be at the time because it was Disney. They always like putting their money into films that would work. And this is just another thing I'm gonna note. I should have mentioned it a couple minutes ago, but I think another one of the reasons why some people think the film is a little bit too dark is the fact that it's made by Disney. And you would expect it to be a family film more akin to the original Wizard of Oz, because that's what a lot of the very popular Disney films are kind of like. And they expected, oh, it's an Oz movie, it's going to be a musical, which I have to say the film works in that it's not a musical, at least for me, because a darker musical could have worked if done right, but I think it works better without being a musical. Because you can't really recreate the spirit of Oz in another musical unless you're doing another adaptation of the original story, or more so the MGM film, like doing it on stage or something. That's the only way I think you can really recreate that musical magic. And that's just me. But if you think about it, they were doing some slightly dark films around this time too, like The Black Cauldron would be one. This, of course, was also the same decade where they started doing more adult films through one of their other companies. They wouldn't release it to the Disney logo. So, they were taking some chances here, but I think this is probably one of the few dark films that they released through their own Disney logo, which I could guess that probably would be might put people off, but I just don't see it personally. Now, the film began development in 1980, apparently. It was during a brainstorm session at Disney between production chief Tom Wilhite and, of course, the director Walter Murch, which I have to say, sadly, this was the only film he ever directed. He's more well known as being a editor and stuff. Like, he worked on Apocalypse Now and its re-edit, Apocalypse Now Redux. And I believe he won an Oscar for that, so he knows what he's doing. And you can tell with how he shot the film that he shot it with he probably shot it not only with the actors and the effects and stuff in mind, but also with how it would be edited. And that's probably how the film was also written, and it works. So it shows that you can
you should take input sometimes, or you go into a different field in film and still do great just based on the skill you came with. But anyway, now during this brainstorm session, one of the questions that was asked is, what are you interested in that you think we might also be interested in? And the answer came up, another Oz story. And of course, at the time, Disney owned the rights to a couple of them, and they went from there. And as I mentioned, it's loosely based on The Marvelous Land of Oz and Ozma of Oz, which I will address the elements that apparently they took from some of them. And of course, Merck took the risk of making a darker take, which of course I've already discussed. But apparently, once shooting began, it fell behind schedule a little bit. At one point, Merck was even fired. But he was defended by not only Francis Ford Coppola, but George Lucas, which I actually think that's cool. Back when Lucas was actually a good guy, instead of, being all dick. Oh, you can't show the movies at the bar. Screw it, we're going to watch Spaceballs. And I feel that Merck's hard work with not only the script and the directing paid off. Because I have to say, it's hard for me to say which of the three Oz films is my favorite, because I like them all for each individual thing. I guess it depends on what mood I'm in. If I want a darker story, I'll watch this one. If I want a more lighthearted story, I'll watch the original. If I want something in between, when it comes out, I'll probably watch Oz the Great and Powerful. Now, one thing I'm happy to say is this did get an Academy Award nomination. It got the one for visual effects, and I want to see real quick what it lost to, because I'm curious to see what beat this movie. Let's see, 60. It lost to Cocoon. The other nominee was Young Sherlock Holmes, so at least it lost to a film that's also considered a classic. Now, anyway, the plot of the film is it takes place 6 months after Dorothy returned from the Land of Oz. She's basically getting slight insomnia, and she's also obsessed with her memories of Oz. And of course, this is worrying her Aunt Em and Uncle Henry, who decide to take her to a doctor who is known for treatments, and it's electroshock therapy. Now, this is one of the things that some people have problems with the dark thing, but it's the time period. You gotta let it slide a little bit because of the time period. Back then, electroshock therapy was considered a very safe treatment. Nowadays, it's usually reserved for certain cases. Like this, I don't think it'd be considered for nowadays, but you could, with how the doctor does explain it, you could see what the logic back then would be in. So, I guess that's probably, even as a kid, I probably realized that. Now, anyway, at the lab, Dorothy meets this one girl who helps her escape during a blackout. They're chased by a strict nurse named Wilson. That's her last name, apparently. I'm checking real quick. Just says head nurse. Yeah, her head nurse Wilson. That's the last name. Anyway, they end up on a floating raft thing in the river as it's raining. And of course, they fall into the river. The girl vanishes, but Dorothy survives, and she clambers on this chicken coop thing. And when she wakes up, she's in the Land of Oz with Billina. I know it's a weird way to get into the Land of Oz. I mean, you think the tornado's a little bit more plausible, but it works in this case. And of course, she sees that her chicken Billina, who we see when she's back at the farmhouse, is with her, and Billina can now talk because they're in Oz. And of course, they eventually find their way to the Yellow Brick Road, which is basically in ruins, and they follow it to the end of Emerald City, which is also in ruins. And they find that all the citizens, from random people to the Tin Woodsman and the Cowardly Lion, have been turned to stone. And they also come across these creatures called Wheelers, which are people who have wheels instead of hands and feet. And of course, they're not one of the scary things, but antagonists, they got to be a little scary. They chase Dorothy, and they meet another friend named Tik-Tok, who is the Royal Army of Oz, left there by the Scarecrow. He helps them defeat the Wheelers, and they are taken to the castle where they meet Princess Mombi, who is a witch that can switch heads. And of course, Mombi, when she reveals herself, locks Dorothy away, where they meet Jack Pumpkinhead. And together, with him and Tik-Tok, they just arrive a plan to escape and leave to defeat the being who did all this to Oz, the Gnome King, who lives in a mountain across the deadly desert. And of course, the plot is to save the Scarecrow from the Gnome King's grasp and free Oz from his dictatorship. And that's the plot. Now, first thing I will say is, even though it's technically not a direct sequel, it does have a couple homages. First of all, the Ruby Slippers, that's one. That's probably the only real direct connection that this is connected to the MGM film in any way. Secondly, people in the real world play people in Oz, and that's a homage I'm actually glad they kept. And I'm glad you guys all know from my other review, I'm glad they did that also with Oz the Great and Powerful. And I will say, if they continue to make live-action Oz films, or even animated ones, it's a homage I hope they keep. Another one was that they presented as being kind of a dream thing, although this film does kind of give a little wink to the audience that it wasn't a dream, that's just how she returned there, because in the first film, it more than likely is a dream, even though it does have that little thing that maybe it isn't. It's more stated here that it probably wasn't, but I do like that they do give that little possibility. Now, our cast, we got Fairuza Balk playing Dorothy Gale, and as a child actress, she does a pretty good job in the role. You really do believe her. I mean, her performance is as memorable as, let's say, don't you just hate it when you forget the name of an actress? Oh, dang. Anyway, this is Balk's first movie role, so it does kind of show a little bit, but she did a good job. Judy Garland, that's what it is. Judy Garland. Isn't memorable as Judy Garland, but still a pretty good job. Other roles she's known for, she was in the 96 version of The Island of Dr. Moreau, American History X. I know her mostly as Vicky Valancourt from The Waterboy, you know, Adam Sandler's love interest, and I have to say, you can see that she did actually stay in acting. It's pretty good. And she also voiced Mercedes Cortez in Grand Theft Auto Vice City, which that's kind of cool. Then we got Brian Henson as the voice of Jack Pumpkinhead, and I'm checking quick to see if this is who I think it is. Yeah, it is the son of Jim Henson. I have to say, Jackie does a pretty good job. I buy the voice and stuff. And of course, you know, he did other stuff like this. You know, he was in the Muppet movies. He was in Labyrinth. He was the second unit director and chief puppeteer for the 1990 TMNT movie. He was the director of Muppet Treasure Island. That's cool. And he's done other stuff. He was also the executive producer on the Muppet Wizard of Oz. That's interesting. And of course, as Tik-Tok, we got Sean Barrett, and he does a pretty good job as the voice of the character. Very believable. You buy him as the Army. Other than this, he played Inspector Zingata in one of the Lupin the Third movies. He played Captain Orion in Starfleet. Ah, that's interesting. He did two voices in The Dark Crystal. He was Ursu, the Dying Master, and Urza, the Ritual Guardian. Ritual Guardian, I'm guessing that's a priest character. And is that basically all of note? That's basically all of note to talk about here, at least acting-wise. As the Gnome King and, of course, the Doctor, we got Nicole Williamson, which he did an excellent performance as the Gnome King, and it's mostly a voice work, but near the end he actually is the character physically, and it works there. And the way he inflected his voice and held himself as the Gnome King, you really do buy him in the role, and you really do. He's kind of a charming villain. He's a villain. At first you hate him, then you'll kind of like him, then you hate him again, and that's pretty cool when they can pull it off with a villain, and it works with the Gnome King. Even though I haven't read the books with the Gnome King in it, but I don't think that's part of the thing from the novel, or if it is, they pull it off well, but I gotta look it up. Other than this, other movies he's known for is the 69 version of Hamlet, where he played the title character. He was in an episode of Columbo. He played Merlin in Excalibur from 1981. He played Macbeth in an 83 version of the play for the BBC. He played King Ferdinand in a TV miniseries of Christopher Columbus. He was Father Morning in The Exorcist 3. And he played his final film was Spawn, where he played Cagliostro, which I had a feeling I recognized his voice somewhere, and that's where it is. Which, of course, sad that was his final film, but he's a good actor, and I have to say, the stuff I've seen him in, I do enjoy him in, but this is probably my favorite role. And, of course, as Mombi in The Head of Nurse, we got a phone ringing. Why I never take the phone off the hook so I can easily grab it and hang up, I do not know. The target's calling.
Call from target. Call from target.
Anyway, there it goes. Anyway, Jean Marsh, however you pronounce it, as Mombi. She did an excellent job, and I do like. This isn't probably another little homage to the 39 film is that one of the people that plays the villain, is both a jerk in the real world and in the fantasy world. That was interesting. And of course, there's also another thing in the real world that does give a little hint about Oz being real, which is interesting. Anyway, here are the roles she was in. She appeared several times in Doctor Who. It's kind of harder to read here because I got to read through a list of stuff. She appeared in an Alfred Hitchcock movie called Frenzy. She was in a Nickelodeon TV show called The Tomorrow People. She was in Ghost Hunter. She was in the 2007 BBC adaptation of Sense and Sensibility, among others. That's probably what I'm going to look up. But she did a good job here. Very memorable as Mombi. Even though Mombi in the... I'll get to it in a minute bit, but Mombi is kind of different here than she is... Slightly different here than she is in the novel. Piper Laurie and Matt Clark as Aunt Em and Uncle Henry. They did a pretty good job. And I have to say, I probably like them here better than the 39 film, but that's just me. Denise Breyer as the voice of Billina. I thought she did a good job and added a little bit of a country flavor to it, as well as adding that kind of a slightly archetypical chicken flavor to it. Other than this, she voiced Commander Makara in Starfleet. Apparently she did some Doctor Who audio dramas. She was in The Adventures of Twizzle, among others. And she was the junk lady in Labyrinth. And according... That's about it, apparently. She was mostly a voice actress, it says. Let's see, the voice of the Gump was a guy named Lyle Conway, but no page, so I can't look him up. Let's see, who... Even though he's not till the end, the guy that played... where's the guy that played the Scarecrow? Was a guy named Justin Case. Not too bad. And then, of course, the character of Ozma is played by Emma Ridley, which, from what I understand, she originally auditioned for the role of Dorothy, but it went to, of course... Balk, which I'm glad that they gave her an additional role, you know, in lieu of that. It was nice. They weren't just jerks. Now, anyway, the stuff that is, other than loosely the plot, the stuff that is taken from it is like in the books. Tik-Tok is basically a one-man army. They don't call him that, but he like works for another guy and eventually becomes Dorothy's servant. Unlike the phone.
Call from Boom.
Why can't Tik-Tok take care of that? Beat up the phone.
Call from.
Okay, anyway, back to what I was saying. Mombi in the movie is a composite character. She's based off two characters. Mombi from the second book, which is an old witch that is involved with the whole Ozma thing. And she does bring Jack to life like they mentioned in the movie. And another character, a princess from the third book, who does switch heads, like people switch clothes, but she's not really a major villain. She's only like a villain in the fact that she causes an inconvenience to the main characters. But adding them together, I think, adds another layer to Mombi and makes her a little bit more insane and a little bit more creepy. Like, the whole... I could see another reason why some parents might be turned off by the whole row of heads thing, but I think it works, and it makes her even creepier, especially since it kind of builds up to us seeing what Mombi's actual head is and all that. The Gump couch is taken from the second book, and it's done similarly but different, but like how they interpreted it here. Jack Pumpkinhead. That's why I got confused there. They're all both released by Disney too, so Jack Pumpkinhead, taken from the second book, brought to life same way they mentioned in it, but plot-wise something different. The Gnome King, he's basically the antagonist of the third book, and apparently he's the closest thing that the Oz books have to a main antagonist. Now, he does have a magic item in the book, but it's a silver belt, which has the similar powers to the silver shoes from it. And originally, apparently, they were going to have him wear a ruby belt, which would have been very interesting. But instead, they just decided to use the ruby slippers, which I think works just as well. And I thought it was interesting, and of course... He does have some of the same grudges in the book, apparently. You know, doesn't like people constantly digging to take it. But I like it better here because he actually, once he gets the power to do something, he uses that power effectively. Because he never, from what I understand, he never does stuff like this, like he takes people hostage. But if you think about it, if he has a magical item with the same powers as the silver shoes, why didn't he really abuse that power, like take over Oz and all that? the good witches would have fought him, but it would have been an interesting thing. Maybe it's just me. Billina, taken from the third book. She's a companion to Dorothy as well, replacing Toto, like she does here. Let's see. Cowardly Lion and the Scarecrow, we all know them. I don't really need to talk about them. Dorothy Gale. Her returning to Oz is taken from the third book as well, but they're done semi-differently. Like, Ozma actually has a bigger role in that book, apparently. It's called Ozma of Oz for a reason. And all that. It's interesting. Like I said, loosely based, and as I said, my memory of the second book is a little lacking, and I haven't read the third book, so forgive me if I missed anything. Oh, I know another thing, the Wheelers are taken from the third book, but from what I've read, they're not as big as they are here, and I don't think they're as scary from what I remember, but I think they did a good job, and when they do an adaptation like this that's semi-faithful to stuff and create stuff, I don't mind it. You guys know I really prefer it when they're really faithful, but when they do stuff like this and it's still an interesting film and still faithful to its source in a way, I don't mind it. My rating for Return to Oz is a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Excellent film, and while I don't mind the darkness, some people might not like it, and it might put some people off, but it doesn't bother me.